In 2023, I played a lot of games. I've been doing my top 10 games I played in such and such year for 4 years now. I resigned myself when I first started this little tradition to simply rank the games I played that year, rather than only the new releases. I'm a single creator without a team, with a career, a family, and a life offline. I've never been able to play every new release across 4 different platforms. And for those that can, I'd say that perhaps they don't fully get to process each and every game they play. They can't come back to a game, say 4 months later in the same year, and have an entirely new and exciting outlook on it. Sometimes you must spend time getting to know the characters, the mechanics, the way it plays, to develop a strong opinion of it. Or maybe it's just me that needs time for this. Now, this all is a conversation for another time or another video, so let's talk about what you will watch here in just a few minutes. This is my top 10 list of video games I played this year. There isn't a defining black and white rule set that I use to determine a game's place on this list. It's all based in feeling, memories, moments, the people I played with, and the things I was doing in other areas of my life while I was playing. I love video games, but they aren't my entire being. So often, our outside world and offline life can impact how we perceive the games we're playing. All of these factors come together internally for me, and when it's all said and done, I've got a list. But what's a list without 2 honorable mentions? My first honorable mention may come as a surprise to many of you. It's a game I have given high praise to ever since I found it. In fact, it's my favorite and highest rated MMO of all time, Guild Wars 2. Now, I went into lengthy detail on my journey in Guild Wars 2 on the episode of Questing the Multiverse entitled A Look Back at Tyria. You can find that episode here on YouTube or on your podcasting app of choice. Because I've already spent a great deal of time talking about it, I'll keep my thoughts here short and sweet. I love Guild Wars 2. I love Tyria. I love Alona. I love Cantha. I love the characters that inhabit the world. I love the story and all its triumphs and tragedies. There are very few things I do not like about the game, and for me, it's the greatest MMO of all time. But this particular year of gaming was absolutely stacked in new, exciting, and unforgettable experiences. Second, we've got a game that I'll admit I never thought I'd put on any list like this. It's a game I played a great deal of in 2018 and 2019, but then fell off of playing, as did most of the world for a time: Fortnite. Now, Fortnite's inclusion as an honorable mention is due to 2 specific factors, really. The first is its return to the OG map that existed in the game's Battle Royale game mode in Season 5 of Chapter 1, all the way back in 2018. This was an amazing journey back down memory lane as I got to play in all my old haunts. Zero build, of course. I've never been good at building, and I'm certainly not getting any better. Second, though, is the introduction of Fortnite Festival. I played a massive amount of Guitar Hero when it was the game taking the world by storm in the mid to late 2000s, and getting to experience that in the modern era with online leaderboards, online matchmaking, and newer, though not as exciting, songs has been a load of fun. Despite my great enjoyment of both of these games this year, what follows are my favorite games I played in 2023. It's been many years since I've played a JRPG. I really can't remember the last time I played a turn-based pixel RPG like Sea of Stars, probably one of the Fire Emblems in the early 2000s. So when I fired up Sea of Stars on the Xbox because of its inclusion on Game Pass, I guess I really didn't have any expectations. Even if I had, Sea of Stars would have blown them away. I think it's safe to say this is one of the best JRPGs to be released in recent years. I do still need to play Octopath Traveler 2, and likely will now that Sea of Stars has adequately primed me for this genre. This game is charming, both in its art but also its story, between Zale and Valerie's growth into Solstice Warriors to Garl's. Okay, so I must say, the kids, the wife, and myself would always do this thing when Garl was on screen, where we just say his name like Jimmy Neutron's teacher would say Carl. Carl! Yeah, we're weird. Anyway, back to it. Can-do attitude to Sarai's mysterious aloofness, Sea of Stars instantly hooks you into its world. On top of that, there are even animation cutscenes to tell pivotal parts of the story. That was a nice surprise. I spent quite a few lazy afternoons playing this game as my two oldest children watched. They loved the goofy pixel sprites, the fact that I would read all the text to them in silly voices, and the cool monsters I was fighting. While Sea of Stars is typically not something in my wheelhouse today, it was a reminder of the games I used to play, back when TVs were 25 inches, 4:3 aspect ratio, and I had to finish my homework before playing.
Grandpa, were you a hero in the war? Grandpa said no. But I served in a company of heroes.
I will never know what it was actually like to fight in World War II. I may never know what it's like to serve my country in such a way. Hell, even our relationships and friendships have changed in such a way that I may never forge either in a baptism of fire like the heroes of Easy Company did. I can't imagine the strength of a bond made between those who fought the untold horrors of that war. Instead, I play war. I play games that honor that time and that important part of our world history, and there is no greater game that honors World War II like that of Hell Let Loose. Whether it's the frightening realism, a realism my wife was quick to point out included respawning after dying, the levels of vocal communication, different roles, or the intricately designed maps, Hell Let Loose has the right blend of multiplayer shooter elements that make it the de facto World War II sim FPS game. This year, getting a full squad of 6 players together on any given night to play Hell Let Loose was a challenge, but on nights when we had at least 4, we loaded into 1940s France or Germany and waged war. Ultimately, it's the communication element that makes this game so exciting, especially as an officer. You see, officers have access to command chat, which includes all other officers on your team and the commander. Then there's squad chat, which is just you and up to 5 other players. Finally, there is local area chat. If you are like me though and play in Discord, you'll have a 4th channel of vocal interaction. Here, this is a good example of how chaotic it can get.
They can't be out in the open, so they're going to be in this forest.
In the middle of the
right
field, they've got a guy.
Wait, so where
Everything-
did you say
Henry has a
again?
garrison
Market?
somewhere in H7.
You see Conniff's garrison mark?
Yeah.
Either right here or somewhere in there. But
You
that's
could
where
just
they're pushing hard.
Draw a circle around that area, 100 meters in any direction, and start painting it.
Yeah, here you go. Here's your mark. In fact, you might be able to move it up.
Start painting. Even if they're further
Set up
closer
over
to the
here.
point, that's where they're spawning.
I'm going for it, I'm going for it. Smoke might give me cover.
Yeah.
Sorry, Matt.
Did you get the sniper?
No.
Here. Now, I know that may seem like the opposite of fun, but with Hell Let Loose's pacing, it isn't too overwhelming once you've gotten used to it. Simply put, I've not played a multiplayer shooter with better communication than Hell Let Loose. And while I certainly don't know what it's like to be in a company of heroes, I have enjoyed the camaraderie of this simulated version of World War II. Sea of Stars may have been a reminder of the games I used to play, but Mega Man Battle Network 3 Blue version is a game I used to play. Well, sort of. Earlier this year, Capcom released a legacy collection of the Battle Network series, a series I grew up with. In fact, I still have all the Game Boy cartridges, with their save states frozen in time, assuming the cartridge's battery hasn't died. I loved this series. It had a decent story, fun combat, addictive chip collection, even multiplayer through the use of a link cable. That's this thing right here if you weren't around back then. It even went the route of Pokemon and included different versions starting at Game 3 in the series. These versions had minor differences like some bosses, some chips, and a few more substantial things later in the series. One of my favorite things about the series as a whole, though, was flipping between Mega Man and LAN. LAN was almost entirely story-driven elements, where Mega Man was almost entirely combat elements. This back and forth was a lot of fun, as playing Mega Man or LAN was neither boring nor a waste of time. So when the Legacy Collection was originally announced, I knew I had to get it. I wanted to relive these games from my childhood. On the day of its release, I loaded up the kids in the car, drove to GameStop, which is likely still around thanks to Reddit or some trust fund, depending on how you look at it, and I picked up a copy of Mega Man Battle Network Legacy Collection on Switch. I opted to start with number 3 because that was the first game I played in my childhood. Yeah, it's the same old game, with all the same charm that sucked me in decades ago. Only this time, I was able to share in that joy with my own kids. It was a good time. I vaguely remember when Risk of Rain 2 came out. I had a few old Steam friends that I'd keep tabs on from time to time that played it a bunch in 2019. I even seem to recall YouTube highlights from that year mentioning it as a stellar multiplayer game. All of this went in one ear and out the other, until my dear friend from another continent, thousands of miles away, Tempest Fox, came into my life. It's really not that dramatic, but he's from New Zealand, and they're a dramatic people. After all, having to live with orcs and hobbits and elves and rings, and it must make life interesting. Anyway, Tempest gifted me Risk of Rain 2 on my birthday this year, and boy, am I glad he did. Risk of Rain 2 might just be my favorite roguelite game that exists. Between the completely out-of-control power scaling that can happen, which is some of the most fun I've had in gaming in recent years, to stealing items from friends, because yes, I am that guy. Risk of Rain 2 offers a ton of replayability and excitement, solo or with friends. Some of my favorite gaming memories this year come from just sitting back, listening to the epic music, zipping around the map, and destroying alien entities. Now, I am also the person that really only plays with the artifact of command, which for those of you who've played it, may say is easy mode. And you're honestly right, but it also leads to the aforementioned out-of-control power scaling, which again is unbelievably fun. Who wouldn't want to be god tier flying around the map and annihilating bosses in one shot? It's a simple fact that I can do that makes this game so good. So thank you again, Tempest, for opening my eyes to the joy that is blasting aliens with arrows, ICBMs, zapping them with ukuleles, or slaughtering the entire map within seconds via ghostly daggers. I've wrestled with my thoughts on this game ever since completing it, not but a week and a half after starting. And I do mean complete it. As of this video, it's the only game in my Steam library I've 100% of the achievements for. And if you know anything about this game's launch, that may come as a surprise. You see, Star Wars Jedi Survivor is a fantastic Star Wars video game. It is better than its predecessor in nearly every way. There are more cosmetic options, including different outfits, hairstyles, lightsaber parts, blaster parts, BD-1 parts, and yes, a poncho or two. There are more things to collect due to the introduction of perks, the Saloon Garden, and aquarium fish. Yes, you can collect fish. Well, you don't collect the fish, but this fellow does.
Like a fish! like the nose of a bony fish. They have 3 great claws.
But you see, even with all these neat additions, improvements, a better story, and greater exploration, the game was brought to its knees by one of the worst optimizations in gaming this year. In fact, I don't have a ton of unique footage from this game because I crashed over 30 times in my playthrough. I simply didn't want to try recording footage and play the game at the same time due to its volatile nature. It is because of this optimization that Steam reviews for Jedi Survivor are mixed. Despite this, I loved my time playing the game, when not filling out crash reports. It has all the elements that make Star Wars fun for me, and a story that rivals at least the best of Disney-era Star Wars like The Mandalorian and Andor. So, while it definitely makes my top 10 list this year, a smoother experience could have propelled it closer to the top of this list. It may be a long shot, but I really hope EA has learned their lesson for when it comes time to release the third game in this series. By the 1990s, video games had been around in one way or another for nearly 30 years. From the first video game, Tennis for Two, in 1958, to Pong, to Super Mario Bros., to all manner of arcade cabinets, video gaming as an entertainment medium was growing in popularity. Then came Doom, and that gave rise to the concept of first-person shooters. Needless to say, video games have come an incredibly long way since then. But it was in the 1990s that a little game called Half-Life was born. A good game, but more importantly, a game that grandfathered in a whole host of first-person story-driven shooters. And not just that, Steam itself may not exist were it not for Valve's very first success story. But Half-Life, in its original form, is not the game on this list. No, that honor goes to Black Mesa. A game by fans for fans that faithfully recreates the original game in all its dazzling glory, complete with an expanded version of Zen, which was famously lacking in the original game's release. Black Mesa is a love letter to the original game in a modern engine with modern textures and models. It is the best way to experience the original for someone who wasn't around to play it in the 90s. It looks so good, in fact, that here is a side-by-side comparison of Black Mesa and Half-Life 2, a game that originally blew Half-Life 1 out of the water in graphics. I remember Half-Life 2 looking like Black Mesa does now. Funny how time can do that to your memory of something. Black Mesa was a joy to play through this year, and I loved seeing and going exploring through sections of the facility that I haven't seen in over 20 years. I may have to add this one to my rotation and play it once every few years. It's that good. By the end of May, Divinity Original Sin 2 was hands down the best game I had played so far this year. And going into it, I knew 2 things about it. One, that it was a turn-based CRPG, a term I was not at all familiar with at the time. And 2, that many people had it as their game of the year when it released in 2017. But that was it. I didn't know what to expect as far as story or combat was concerned, but I fired it up, created a custom wizard character, and was off to Fort Joy in a prison transport vessel. Now, for anyone who has not played DOS 2, let me break down the sheer volume of content in this game. You'll spend about 25% of your time in the game in Act 1, which largely serves as your tutorial and introduction to the plot and characters. You'll then spend 35% of your time in Act 2, which is where the game, its story, and all the characters you'll need to know come alive. In Act 3, 15%. This act is a pivotal story moment and sets up the rest of the game. Finally, in Act 4, when all the story elements are reaching their climax, you'll spend about 25% of your time. My playthrough of DOS 2 took about 96 hours. That was 96 hours of mind-bending, role-playing freedom as a source-filled divine champion. Every encounter was memorable, every conversation important, even little things like helping a turtle and a rat fall in love or letting a lich freely leave their crypt were interesting, and that specifically a terrible decision. Oh, on the topic of the turtle and the rat, simply talking to animals is exciting because they may give you hints about what you're doing or where treasure is. I really don't think there was a single moment of Divinity Original Sin 2 in which I was not having fun. When it came to combat, well, the combat was challenging. I'm not all that great at turn-based strategy, and even when I got the hang of it, I still had to contemplate my actions in order to come out on top. There's not a lot more I can get into without going down spoiler territory, but I loved this game so much that I even purchased the collector's edition graphic novel Godwoken, which gives insight into the origin characters' lives before the opening act of the game. If you're looking for the second greatest CRPG ever created, look no further. Remnant II is simply the greatest gun-focused Souls-like game ever created, and that's my hot take. I really don't know what else you could even put it up against. I had such a blast running through the different worlds that make up Remnant 2's story, from the gothic fantasy Losum, which does give off the most Dark Souls or Bloodborne vibes, to the H.R. Giger-inspired Nerud, to the wild and untamed jungles of Yesha. The story was admittedly a little hit or miss, but the combat, weapons, abilities, and sheer amount of crazy secrets more than made up for its lukewarm characters and plot. But all of this would just be standard video game fare in any other game, but the way Remnant 2 includes multiplayer and randomized rogue-like elements into your progression in the game is really what sets it apart. Unlike any of the Dark Souls or Elden Ring, you can group up with anybody at any time, no matter where they are in the story. And if they are on a different world than you and you join them, you can unlock items, weapons, or armor for your own playthrough while playing with them. In fact, the easiest way to get a load of scrap, which is necessary to upgrade weapons, is to simply join someone else who is not as far along as you and pick up items you already have, which then automatically convert to scrap. It's a brilliant system that encourages group play. As if that wasn't enough, each player's playthrough a specific world, take Losum for example, may be different. I had to fight different bosses in my version of Losum from those that my friend Shiloh had to fight in his. Likewise, another friend of ours, Stark, started on a completely different world to Losum. And when you complete a world and its pertinence to the story, you can replay it to get a different instance and experience new things. Remnant 2 came out of left field for me this year, and it's a game I eagerly look forward to getting back to as DLC comes out. I get the negativity surrounding Starfield. It's been said by many people across YouTube that Starfield would have been Game of the Year if it released in 2013. Other players lament the fact that it seems Bethesda chased quantity over quality with their first new IP since The Elder Scrolls. And you know, I understand it. I get that. And ultimately, it's true. If you look at previous open-world RPGs to win Game of the Year, The Witcher 3, Elden Ring, and Breath of the Wild, you'll find that each of those gives you seamless exploration without loading screens, and something to do every 30 to 60 seconds. They are ultimately the modern RPG. Starfield, instead, follows Bethesda's tried-and-true method of game design. And that worked for Skyrim, and it certainly worked for Fallout 4. But for Starfield, 8 years after the release of Fallout 4, it simply isn't enough anymore. Not when 3 years previous we got Cyberpunk 2077, which, while not NASA sci-fi, has enough similar elements to make Starfield look and feel outdated. But Starfield hit me a little differently from all those other YouTubers, reviewers, and game journalists. It brought me right back to the days in the early 2000s when my friend Newbie and I would sit in front of a TV and play Morrowind. Or a few years later when I'd watch him play Oblivion and go through dungeon after dungeon slaying skeletons into the early morning hours. There's just something about Starfield that clicks inside me that allows me to look past all of the loading screens, the surface-level companion dialogue, the sheer emptiness of many of the 1,000 planets Todd so gleefully boasted about. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I had a great deal of fun in Starfield this year, and I know my time playing it isn't over. There's still many more ships to build, outposts to manage, planets and moons to explore, and little nuggets of lore to be found in some terminal inside of a processing plant on a backwater world. And while it may be lonely, I'll have Einon Zur's magnificent soundtrack to lay softly on top of the stillness of that world. And I'll come back again and again to experience that. Remember this? If you're looking for the second greatest CRPG ever created, look no further. Yeah, Larian Studios couldn't settle for already having created arguably the best CRPG of all time. They needed to create something better. They needed to actually create the greatest RPG of all time. DOS 2 was just a trial run. And what was it a trial run for? This.
My name's Astarion.
Joking aside, Baldurs Gate 3 is Larian Studios' magnum opus. As far as I'm concerned, it's the greatest CRPG of all time. Likely the greatest RPG across all different types of all time. Well, maybe except for the TRPG it's based on, Dungeons & Dragons. I was pretty much, at the time of its release, brand new to the Forgotten Realms. My only real experience with it was reading one of the Dritz novels when I was younger, and seeing Honor Among Thieves this year in theaters. In fact, when Shiloh and myself started our podcast, Questing the Multiverse, we dedicated the first several episodes to Baldur's Gate 3 and the world of the Forgotten Realms. And you know what? I think it might just be my favorite fantasy universe. So it's no surprise that I was blown away by BG3. From the opening cinematic to getting into the meat of the game, making decisions, romancing companions, or just Shadowheart, and fighting all manner of monsters, Baldur's Gate 3 lives and breathes its Forgotten Realms setting. And with multiplayer, you can have as close to a true D&D experience as you can get without even needing to be at the same table, or in the same state, or the same country. Baldur's Gate 3 expands upon the systems Larian built in Divinity Original Sin 2 by including dice rolls for all skill and speech checks, among other things. But I never grew tired of this dice bit of the game, especially later in the game when failing checks could have huge ramifications to the story or my companions. And companions. An entire video could be made on the companions in BG3. No doubt some already have been made. They are phenomenal. I haven't experienced character development and writing this good in a video game since Life is Strange. The way Astarion grows into a not-so-bloodthirsty vampire, or the way Shadowheart overcomes her past self, or the way Gale learns to trust others and see the good in those around him. There's a lesson and opportunity for growth for each character, and those three were just the ones I had in my party. Baldur's Gate 3 is my #1 game of the year, by a landslide. It wasn't even close. When I was piecing together this list, I had 43 different games to consider. Like I said, I played a lot of games in 2023. Many more games were not included than were, and so here are a few that didn't quite make it, separated into two specific categories: games I played and games I didn't. Of all the games I did play this year, World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy XIV, and RuneScape simply didn't make the cut. The first two I hardly experienced this year. Sure, I leveled a character to 70 in World of Warcraft, and I've got a toon with 3 combat jobs at level 40 in Final Fantasy XIV, but I've hardly scratched the surface of what either game offers. Plus, I know I'll be back. I'm still playing Final Fantasy XIV, and I'll probably be back in Azeroth within the next 6 months, let's be honest. RuneScape, though, I've got plenty of experience in that game. I even leveled up Archaeology to level 120 this year, not to mention leveling Necromancy to the mid-80s. RuneScape is a game I will likely always come back to off and on. It's old faithful, and my friend Metalis and I can always hop back in when the urge arises. Maybe do some quests, level some skills, make some gold. It's not going away, and neither are we. Now, for the games I didn't play, well, that's basically every other Game Awards nominee for Game of the Year. Alan Wake 2, Tears of the Kingdom, and Spider-Man 2 being the notable ones. But even some of the indie options like Dredge or Dave the Diver. Again, I play such a variety of games, both old and new, that I'll never be able to get to all the great games that come out in the same year that they come out. Maybe we'll see some of those next year. I don't think we'll get a year quite like 2023 for gaming for a while. There were some exceptional titles released, but even on a more personal note, I played more variety this year than I ever have, exploring genres that I haven't played in decades to never before. I've moved more permanently into a PC-only gaming space, and it's just easier, and with Game Pass working for both console and PC, why would I play some of those games on an Xbox and a TV when I could play on a gaming rig? No matter how I end up playing games next year, I look forward to what the year brings. I look forward to the new worlds I get to explore and then talk about on my podcast. More importantly, I look forward to the new memories I get to make with my friends, whether it's talking about our experiences in a single-player title like Kingdom Come Deliverance, or the hilarity that ensues when someone goes radio silence in Lethal Company. It's the memories and the people we made them with that truly make these games shine. See you all in the next one.